I open the door.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to the kickoff webinar for the revision of ICOM's Code of Ethics for Museums. Today we'll be focusing on the third consultation for the Code of Ethics and introducing the process that we've been through to reach this point and ask for your participation. Emma Nardi, the president of ICOM, will start off, and then I will talk about the code, the revision process, and the outline that we've presented to you. So with that, welcome, Emma.
Thank you, Ellie. And it's my pleasure to open this webinar about the third consultation, because Code of Ethics is in a certain meaning the backbone of ICOM. Everything reports to the Code of Ethics, and it's very important that we have members' participation to discuss points that are not clear or to include points that are not still there. Therefore, I'm very happy that Sally organized this webinar, and I wish you all a very pleasant work. Thank you.
The next slide. Thank you, Emma, and welcome to everyone again. We're pleased to be here today to discuss the third consultation for the revision of ICOM's Code of Ethics for Museums. Next slide. The Code of Ethics is a core document for all ICOM members, as Emma said. It's a foundational document for ICOM. It defines the standards of principled conduct for museums and museum professionals worldwide, and provides a unifying framework for the profession. It expresses the values that we all share, and it should support the work that we do. That's one of the reasons that we have this webinar and the consultation, to make sure that the webinar supports your work and includes in it, to ensure that the Code of Ethics supports your work and includes in it the things that are most important to you. The Code of Ethics was originally adopted in 1986 as the ICOM Code of Professional Ethics. It was then updated in 2001 and adopted in 2004 as the ICOM Code of Ethics for Museums. Next slide. During the ICOM meetings in Kyoto in 2019, there was there were a number of debates about the definition, debates and discussion about the museum definition. At that time, the Standing Committee on Ethics, or ETHCOM, recognized that it was time also to take another look at the Code of Ethics, to express the current values that are important to us now in the field. ETHCOM noted that the social roles that museums play in empowering communities and promoting sustainability and human rights must be acknowledged by ICOM, and the Code of Ethics must address those issues. Thus, at that point, ETHCOM recommended to the ICOM Executive Board that the Code of Ethics be revised. Next slide. This need has become even more urgent, for now, besides the impact of the pandemic, museums are facing challenges to meet their social responsibilities, calls for restitution as well as decolonization, calls for accountability, and the need for policies and practices that encourage equity and inclusion. Next slide. In revising the Code of Ethics, ETHCOM is committed to an open and transparent revision process, and this webinar is part of that. Our methodology is centered around 4 consultations with the ICOM membership. The first, next slide. The first occurred in 2021 when we asked the membership as a whole, should the Code of Ethics be revised and what is missing? Next slide. What we heard unanimously is that it's time to revise the code. The code needed to include issues like sustainability, social responsibility, equity and accessibility, restitution, and the digital dimension of museums. We then, next slide. After hearing that, next slide, please. We developed a second consultation to ask for more detail about what should be changed or deleted and what should be added. And that constituted the second consultation, which happened in 2022. The results of the second consultation told us about 11 trends or observations that ETHCOM needed to consider in revising the code. The first was that there should be a consistency between the code and the museum definition. The second observation was that there were a number of inconsistencies in the Code of Ethics. There were redundancies and structural problems in the current code that need to be addressed. Next slide. The code should address how data information is managed, like, for example, patron or membership data, and to what degree this data can be maintained as confidential. It also, the consultation also told us that the code should be reformulated to reflect the call for accessibility, inclusion, and diversity in the very broadest sense. That is, as part of governance, leadership, and hiring practices, as well as part of what is considered in developing exhibitions and programs. Diverse and inclusive practices should be reflected in the revised code so that the code reflects everyone's right to participate in knowledge sharing, and an expectation that is also reflected in the new definition. The code should be modernized to address both the creation, stewardship, and management of both digital and digitized objects. In addition, there was a concern about the authenticity and integrity of digital images. And we heard that needed to be addressed in the code. We also heard that the code must more adequately deal with intangible cultural heritage. Next slide. And that the code should reflect the changes that have occurred in collections management practices where objects that represent the cultural heritage of traditional communities are concerned. So the code also should address sustainability as it applies to museums, the scope and role of sustainability, and it should be determined and then reflected in the code. The ninth thing that we heard was that the public purpose of the museum should be recognized more clearly. Emphasis should be placed upon the people the museum serves and the communities connected to them. Further, museums should invest in its people to support their professional expertise, to support their autonomy in making curatorial decisions and their capability. I should add that this element or this concern about the public purpose of the museum was one that was very loudly heard during the consultation and became very important to our considerations as we considered the revision of the code. As you'll see, the topics that that we're presenting today and we're presenting in the third consultation focus a lot on communities and on the human factor that is involved in museum work. We also heard that the role that the consultation also pointed out the problematic ethical issues that have resurfaced recently in relation to the role that museums play in zones of war or conflict and the duty of care to safeguard collections in such time. And then finally, concern was expressed about the commodification of collections or the monetization of collections by museums. Next slide. So there is a report on ETHCOM's page in the ICOM website member space that goes into detail about all of these results from the second consultation. It also discusses the results within the context of the current code of principles in the current code of ethics. So you can see how they might possibly be incorporated into what we currently have. Next slide. You'll find the results of the second consultation, as well as additional information about the revision of the Code of Ethics in the ETHCOM's member space page. And the entire report about the second consultation is there, as will be the report on the third consultation once it is completed. Next slide. In response to the second consultation results, the items that I just mentioned and others that are expressed in the report, the ETHCOM has created an outline of the revised code. And this is the subject of the third consultation, which opened on the 16th of June and will extend to the end of October, October 31st this year. For this consultation, we are requesting responses from the national and international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations. And we ask that everyone contact the committee to which they belong to express their suggestions and for the revision of the code. The ETHCOM took the advice that we received from the second consultation, as well as from the roundtable that we held in Prague last year, and developed an outline for the revised code. Next slide. The outline is organized around 5 core topics. And each topic is then followed by statements that elaborate upon that topic. The first focuses on responsibilities to communities. So these are the responsibilities of museums to their communities, the communities whose objects the museums care for, the communities in which the museums are located, and the communities that benefit from museums' activities. The second topic is related to professional practices. To sustain the trust of the public, museums should operate according to professional standards, and these entail responsibilities on the part of the museums, as well as the responsibilities on the part of the individuals and groups that work with and in museums. So you'll see that the topic on professional practices is broken into 2. One related to the museum and the other related to the professionals that are involved in the museum. The third core topic deals with the museum's educational role. Again, a point that was raised over and over in the second consultation. The educational role of museums has become much more prominent and much more important to museums in the past 20 years, as museums have realized their responsibilities to the communities whose lives they touch upon. The fourth core topic addresses the museum's responsibility in stewarding and safeguarding its collections. a key role for museums, and one that has increased in complexity as time has passed. And we will address that the in the collection section of the revised code. We will also incorporate principles from the ICOM Code for Natural History Museums. So at the end of this process, there will be one code of ethics for ICOM rather than several. And finally, the fifth core topic addresses the responsibilities for the museum's governing bodies and leadership. Their responsibilities to ensure that the museum operates in a sustainable manner, serving its communities in perpetuity. We look forward very much to hearing from you about your responses to this outline. We'd like to know what is missing, what needs to be emphasized, and generally just how you think this reflects your needs in terms of your work in museums on a daily basis. Next slide. After the end of October, we will compile the results of Consultation 3 and again produce a report that will be posted on the ETHCOM page on ICOM's website. We will use that report to draft a revised code, which we hope to have ready for your review by 2024. And we will then be joining you again with another series of webinars to discuss the revision of the draft, or to discuss the draft of the revision, and getting your feedback in order to create a final revision of the code. Next slide. Our goal is to have a revised code of ethics ready to present to the ICOM membership by the 2025 meeting in Dubai. Next slide. In order to provide further guidance and information and answer your questions, ETHCOM is going to have 4 more webinars in the coming months. We will, on Wednesday, July 19th, we will have a discussion of both the overview of the process for revising the code, and then topics 1 and 2 in the outline on communities and people. On Wednesday, September 13th, we will have another webinar, this time discussing the educational role of museums. Next slide. On Wednesday, September 27th, we will have a webinar that reviews again the process of revising the code and also discusses the topic of collections and research. And then finally, on October 11th, we will have another webinar discussing the issues related to governance and leadership. We hope that these webinars will provide more information and provide opportunities for you to both understand the process that we're going through and contribute your suggestions and comments. Next slide. Please join these webinars and also send your suggestions and comments to your national or international committees, regional alliances, or affiliated organizations. We want to be sure that your voice is heard as we revise the Code of Ethics. So I thank you for joining us today. And now, if you have questions or comments on what you've heard or what you haven't heard, please ask them in the chat, and we will address them.
Chandlia.
Yeah, we have, I'm waiting to see the questions in the chat. We realize that this is a lot of information very quickly, so I hope that you'll be able to absorb at least some of it and think about how it applies to your role in museums and the support that the Code of Ethics can provide for that.
Chandlia wants to speak.
Chadlia?
Yes, I see her hand raised.
Okay, thank you. I can't see everyone, so
Yeah.
Okay. Bonjour, je peux parler en français?
Oui.
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 Ok. Bon, d'abord, merci Sally pour tout le travail qui a été fait et surtout pour ce qui reste à venir. J'aimerais dire à tous les participants que nous avons travaillé beaucoup et que nous aimerions énormément que il y ait beaucoup plus de participants, c'est-à-dire que si les personnes qui sont aujourd'hui présentes pouvaient diffuser l'information pour qu'il y ait un peu plus de réactions et de propositions. Parce que comme vous le savez, le code d'éthique, c'est vraiment le document le plus fondamental concernant l'ETHCOM. Même si je fais partie du groupe, mais j'aimerais évoquer une question. Est-ce que la manière de présenter les priorités telles que nous les présentons c'est la façon la meilleure de présenter qui correspond au travail des musées. C'est-à-dire, si je regarde la définition du musée, on commence par dire que le musée est une institution à but non lucratif. Or, dans les thèmes, nous commençons par parler de l'ouverture du musée sur la société. Est-ce que le point 4 ne pourrait pas être remonté un peu dans les priorités afin qu'on parle au début du musée, comme c'était avant dans le code, tout d'abord du musée, expliquer ce que c'est que le musée, les pratiques professionnelles, puis parler des missions des musées. Voilà, merci.
Thank you, Chadlia. That's a really good question, and that's exactly the kind of question that we hope people will answer in this consultation. The results of the second consultation spoke very loudly about the responsibilities of two communities, and so that's the reason that we put that first in the public role of museums. That's the reason that we put that first in the outline. But we'd like to hear all of your comments on that and have an understanding of how the ICOM membership feels about this point. I should add that one of the important things I think that we will be doing in revising the code is perhaps shortening it, in that there's a lot of repetition in the current code, and we'd like to be sure that the code is simplified and made more straightforward. That is in addition to the reorganization of the code. We will, there's a question about from Ekcherki Damali. Would you like to ask the question directly? Okay, he's asked if we can see that we have more chance to add clear and direct items related to decolonization and restitution. Yes, this is not a listing. The outline is not a listing of all of the items that will be included in the Code of Ethics. It's a summary and general statements about what will be included. If there are specific items that you feel should be in the code, please let us know. We will be more specific as we revise the code, but and we will include things that are now in the current Code of Ethics. But we'd like to see, we'd like to hear from you about what are the important items to be included. So there's another question about what kind of response that we would like to receive. We are looking for responses by email from each committee that is reviewing the code. So we would like the committees to discuss among their membership, if they wish, or among their boards, the revision of the Code of Ethics and respond to the outline by email. There's not a specific survey because there are so many issues included in the code that that we felt that it would be best to ask for a narrative response and to leave it up to the committees and how they address the revision. There's a question of whether the item number 2, professional practices, will consider individual responsibilities and professional practices or behavior, that is a code of conduct. Yes, they will. I mean, we had a debate about whether there should be a separate code of conduct or whether that should be included in the Code of Ethics. If you have a feeling about that, we would appreciate hearing that. We feel it's very important to have a professional or a code of conduct for ICOM members. So it will either be in the code or it will be a separate document. One of the strategies that the Ethics Committee has used in the past is the creation of guidelines that elaborate upon certain points in the code and include things that are more like best practices rather than like ethical principles. So we currently have guidelines on accessioning, de-accessioning, and fundraising. We will probably use that same strategy to address in detail some of the more complex issues that have come up in the past 10 years. For example, some of the best practices related to governance and leadership might be included in a set of guidelines rather than included in the Code of Ethics itself. There's a question on whether research ethics why research ethics are not at the top of the list, because research is one of the core functions of the museum. And that's something that we have at this point projected we will discuss in the area relating to collections. But again, thank you for asking that question, and we will consider it as we revise the code. The question, there's a question on where someone can get access to the drafted document. The draft of the outline is now posted on the ETHCOM page in member space. So you should be able to see the whole outline there.
Je ne sais pas si je peux prendre la parole.
Sure, please.
Bonjour. Non, je n'ai pas tout à fait complètement clair qu'est-ce que le nouveau code sera organisé dans ces 5 points que vous avez soulignés et qui sont présents dans le texte. C'est-à-dire on abandonne la vieille structure du code, c'est ça. Ça, c'est une première question. Et puis, je voulais vous demander, parce que on est en train de diffuser, je suis la vice-présidente du Com Italie, on est en train de présenter à tous les membres italiens et les pousser à donner leur avis sur ce texte dont nous remercions. Mais maintenant, je trouve que c'est plutôt c'est plus complexe que l'enquête qu'on a utilisé pour la définition du musée, parce qu'ici, il ne s'agit pas de retrouver des mots-clés, mais il y a, c'est beaucoup plus complexe d'exprimer, je trouve, des observations pour... je voulais donc savoir comment vous attendez dans quelle forme vous voulez qu'on exprime nos observations, des observations ponctuelles ou des propositions d'insérer, par exemple, des questions, des thèmes qui ne sont pas présents, aussi de changements dans l'ordre ou dans la forme. Si vous pouvez nous éclaircir un peu mieux tout ça, merci.
Oh, yes, thank you for your question. We would like to have your feedback on each of the topics that we've proposed, on the substance of the topics, answering questions like, is there something that we have not listed in the topics and statements that should be included in the code? Is there something that's not as important as it seems in the outline that should be reduced in emphasis? So we would like your comments on each of the 5 core topics, and also then on the order of the topics as we've expressed them in the outline. I should emphasize that the outline is really reflects the comments that we've had so far. So we will create the draft of the code to reflect the comments that we hear in response to the outline. Someone else has asked if the report of the findings are available because they can't get on the website. Unfortunately, the report of the findings are on the website. We will also post on the website the webinars, the schedule of webinars. They will be included too in ICOM News so that people who are having problems connecting to the website can see them through the newsletter. And I hope that we will have many opportunities to announce the webinars in advance of their taking place. Also, the webinars are recorded and will be available on the website after they happen. So if you can't attend one of the webinars, you will be able to see the recording of it after the fact. If your committee has created any documents that relate to the Code of Ethics and that you think would help us in creating a revision of the code, you would please call them to our attention. Many times the individual committees, especially the national committees, have created their own Code of Ethics, and that code has elaborated upon the current code and included issues, more contemporary issues. So it would be helpful for us to have all that information to help to use it in the consideration of the revision. There is a question about how to integrate the questions of ethics of interpretation within the topics. I believe that would, we will address that question most likely in the section of the Code of Ethics on education and the presentation of material to the public. There is a question. I believe if my French is accurate enough to read the question, there's a question about the laws that are in the Code of Ethics now that are listed. There will be an appendix to the revision of the Code of Ethics that will address all of the international conventions and legislation that relate to museums and the code. So they will be included as an appendix to the code rather than as an element within it. We're trying to make a clear distinction between a museum's legal obligations and its ethical obligations. Again, there's a question about how the discussions of the Committee on Ethical Dilemmas will fit into our consideration. When there are discussions in individual committees related to the Code of Ethics, we would ask that you make the Standing Committee on Ethics aware of these issues so that we can incorporate them into our discussion about the revision of the code. And there's also a question of if it is possible to get access to the documents in member space, even for people who are not members of ETHCOM. You don't have to be a member of ETHCOM to get access to the documents. You do have to be a member of ICOM, but everyone who is a member of ICOM can have access to the ETHCOM member space on the ICOM webpage. We're counting on your participation as much as possible. It's this is a big task to revise the Code of Ethics, as someone has pointed out. It's not quite as focused or not as focused at all as the responses that you were asked for relating to the definition of museums. So we appreciate your willingness to consider this outline and to respond to it, providing guidance for us as we move forward with this process. There's a question of because I've mentioned that the Code of Ethics would include a list of the international conventions in an appendix. There's a question about whether that means that museums are free not to respect these conventions. No, it does not mean that. It means that it just means that respecting those conventions is a legal responsibility, and we expect we will have a general statement in the Code of Ethics regarding the respecting the conventions, but we won't have a list in the code of ethics per se. It will be in the code, but in an appendix to the code. But if you feel that that's problematic, you should let us know, because we will reconsider that point as we go forward. There's a question on whether the code of conduct will consider the museum space user or focus mainly on professionals. The code of conduct will be related to people who work with or in museums. So the focus of the code is on museums and the people who work in them, as well as the communities who the museums serve. So basically the focus. Another question focuses on the other sectors' codes of ethics, and again, this is a question that we will consider as we revise the code, how we should incorporate other kinds of other professional codes, or whether we should refer to them in the code, but not incorporate the ideas in the code. So this is something that, again, will be discussed. Chadley, I would like to speak.
Je vois qu'il y a plusieurs personnes qui parlent des conventions et des lois concernant le patrimoine en général, ce n'est pas uniquement des musées. Et je trouve qu'on devrait s'attarder un peu là-dessus et poser la question aux membres, quelque part dans les propositions et les consultations que nous allons faire, parce qu'il y a certaines conventions, par exemple de l'UNESCO, qui sont en lien direct avec le travail des musées. Je cite particulièrement les conventions qui ont trait au trafic illicite, qui est cité également dans le code de déontologie. Donc, il faudrait vraiment réfléchir avant de décider de mettre ces lois et ces conventions en dehors du code. Il y a également, puisque nous parlons beaucoup des communautés, du respect des communautés, de l'ouverture sur la société, est-ce qu'il ne faudrait pas également aussi mettre la Convention internationale qui concerne les droits humains? Donc, ça aussi, je pense, comme c'est une question qui revient, je le vois dans le chat, est-ce qu'il ne faudrait pas poser la question aux membres et leur demander s'ils pensent que réellement ces lois et ces conventions, surtout internationales, que l'ETHCOM adopte, ne doivent pas être dans le code, puisqu'elles touchent certains principes du code. Lorsqu'on parle de la sauvegarde des collections, du patrimoine immatériel, tout ça est dans le code. Donc, ce serait bien aussi qu'on puisse les avoir. Moi, je pense qu'on pourrait les avoir dans le code et non pas en annexe. Et comme dit très bien Sally, s'il y a des propositions que vous ne voyez pas dans les thèmes que nous vous présentons, il est toujours temps de dire quels sont les thèmes que vous voudriez voir rajoutés. Il est vrai également que ce n'est pas du tout, et je pense qu'il faut arrêter de faire la comparaison avec la définition du musée. Parce que la définition du musée concernait un petit paragraphe de 5 lignes. Là, c'est tout un document de plusieurs pages où il y a un esprit qu'il faut respecter, où il y a des conditions qui doivent être également prises en compte, dont la définition. La définition est une petite partie de ce code de déontologie. C'est un travail beaucoup plus élaboré qui demande énormément de concentration pour que nous ayons un code qui soit homogène et bien structuré sans perdre l'esprit et la mission générale de l'ETHCOM. Merci.
Yes, thank you, Chedlia. And we are counting on your help in ensuring that we are able to do that. The code is a complex document, and your comments will help us determine, have our discussions about elements of the code and determine the outline for the code, which we'll present next year. So we hope that you will consider the outline very carefully and comment on it as extensively as you feel is appropriate. We will take all comments into consideration and debate the points that are raised as we revise the code. We are dedicated to having an open process in revising the code, so we welcome all comments. At the same time, we're also committed to creating a revised code that is very clear and direct and easier to understand in some instances than the current code of ethics. There is a question of whether the code will be considered in national codes of ethics for museums in each country and state. That I believe that will be, that's actually a decision that the national committees will need to make. And it will be there because each national committee will answer that question for themselves. Because of that, it's important that we hear from each national committee on the important issues that should be included in the new code so that the new code can help support all of your work and can help communicate the purpose and values of museums to local governments and local and national governments. Susie, I believe you have a question.
Oui, bonjour. Je voudrais soulever le problème du patrimoine immatériel. Étant donné qu'il a été inclus dans la définition du musée, est-ce qu'il y a des points bien précis qui soient en relation avec le respect du patrimoine immatériel, étant donné que c'est quand même, je pense, un peu différent du patrimoine matériel? Est-ce que dans ce nouveau code d'éthique, il y a une partie qui sera vraiment dédiée à ces façons de protéger le patrimoine immatériel et tout ce qui s'ensuit? Merci.
Yeah, it's hard to answer specific questions like that right now, but it is likely that there will be a separate section devoted to intangible cultural heritage. That's something that an issue that arose over and over again in the second consultation. And we realized that it needs to be considered and that it may need to be considered as a separate principle in the code. So yes, this is an issue that we will discuss as we change the code. And as I say, it's one that has been that we have heard is important enough at this point to have its own perhaps its own principle in the code. So thank you for that question. It's become a really important consideration for museums. I should add that if there are other points similar to intangible cultural heritage that you feel are really significant for museums and should be included in the code, that's something that we want to hear from you. We will consider all comments as we revise the code. As Chedlia pointed out earlier, it's a complicated process and one that requires much thought and consideration. We have been very fortunate to have dedicated members of the ethics committee who have devoted much time to the process to date. And we look forward to continuing to work with them to develop a draft of the Code of Ethics that reflects your concerns and considerations so that it can help guide us all in our practice in museums for at least the next decade. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar will be posted on the ETHCOM, in the ETHCOM member space under the ETHCOM page. And in addition, the other webinars that are coming up, there will be 4 more, will also be posted there. You will be hearing from us about the schedule for the next 4 webinars. I hope repeatedly in the next few weeks, so that I hope you'll be able to arrange to attend. In those webinars, we will focus more specifically on the topics that are listed in the outline of the code, and we'll ask for your input on those. Also, I note that we have a message from the Secretariat that if you were having problems logging into the ICOM member space, please send a message to membership@icom.museum and support@icom.museum so that you can get assistance to accessing the materials that we've posted there. I can't emphasize enough that we will attend to all comments and questions that we receive. It's very important that we hear from you to get your feedback on the outline and to participate in this process. The revision of the code will only be as strong as the participation and the suggestions and the questions and comments that we get from you. So it's very important to give us your feedback. Are there any other questions or comments at this point? There is a question on whether the Code of Ethics of for Natural History Museums will be integrated completely. It's something that we will consider. We haven't answered the question yet. It may be one of the things that we have discussed is that there may be separate guidelines created similar to our guidelines for accessioning, deaccessioning, and fundraising that will address some of the issues in the Natural History Code that are more a matter of best practice than ethical principles. So again, it's something that we consider. We hope to have one code of ethics that is direct and straightforward, that will be supplemented by guidelines that give more, that address some of the areas more specifically. So we are considering that at the moment. The webinars will be available to all ICOM members so that everyone can participate. And we ask that you send your comments to your committees, to the committees to which you belong directly, though. So those comments can be incorporated with the other comments that are received from your country or your committee. We expect to have, in addition to the 4 webinars that we've announced today, we hope to have webinars that are organized in conjunction with international committees, as well as some of the regional alliances. So if you are a member of a regional alliance and you feel that your alliance would benefit from a webinar focused more regionally, we'd be happy to try to organize one to help out. Okay, and I have there's a comment that the revision of the Code of Ethics document are linked through the Code of Ethics page in member space. Yes, that's true. It's the Code of Ethics page, which is also the ethics, the ETHCOM's page. So it's, I hope that's clear. Sorry. There is a revision of the Code of Ethics page on the ICOM member space, and that's what I've been referring to. And also during the ICOM meetings in Prague, we, ETHCOM held a roundtable about the revision of the Code of Ethics that has been available generally, along with all the other recordings from the ICOM Prague meetings connected to the ICOM website, as the roundtable for the Code of Ethics revision will in the near future be available in ICOM member space, so that you'll be able to review the comments that we received there, even after the recordings of the whole conference are no longer available. So if there are no additional questions or comments, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As you have seen, and as I'm sure you know, this is a very complicated process, and we would welcome all of your comments. The purpose of the outline is to stimulate discussion and debate, and so I hope that it accomplishes that, and that we can incorporate your comments into the revision of the Code of Ethics. So thank you, and I hope that I wish you all a pleasant day or evening, and look forward to hearing much more from you in the future months.